Hello and welcome to another episode of Global Tantrum. As per usual, I'm your host, Steve Pally. With me, as always, is my co-host, Professor Galen Jackson. After a short break, we took a short break because I was out last week, but we're back. How you doing, Galen?
Better than Chauncey Billups and Terry Rozier, man.
What a mess that is.
I
And
mean,
that's a interesting story. I was looking at that. So there's a giant betting scandal engulfing the NBA, which is, already reeling from like the Clippers Kawhi Leonard situation, Steve Ballmer paying Kawhi Leonard under the table. Now we've got Billups and Rozier and who knows who else.
I found all of this shocking. I
Yeah.
found the propensity to fix games and trade insider secrets. I find not surprising at all. It's shocking that when we've made sports betting legal and this easy, that would happen. It's almost like there was a reason professional sports leagues didn't want this for many years. But some
Hmm.
of the details were mind-boggling. I'll leave
Yeah.
it.
So this raises the question, if I have a crap team, like, I don't know, for instance, the Sacramento Kings that I'm a fan of, then they always lose. Could I manipulate the outcomes if I were a billionaire and willing to spend millions to manipulate the odds? I could do it the other way around, right? Anyway, this week we're going to be talking about cybersecurity. And this has become topical because earlier in the week, actually on my birthday, October 20th,
Oh,
what
happy birthday, by the way, man.
thank you. I don't celebrate anymore. I'm too old,
All
but I
right.
do appreciate it. I stated it just more as a fact than like wanting congratulations, but I'm glad you did. Basically, a huge chunk of the internet went down. And this was as a result of a botched DNS update on an AWS, that's Amazon Web Services server in one of the main regions, US East 1. And this is where they run DynamoDB. And I'm saying lots of words that probably don't make a lot of sense right now. Suffice it to say that DynamoDB provides the cloud infrastructure layer, so the servers that drive many, many important applications on the internet. And so, as a result of this botched DNS update, and we'll get into what exactly that means in a little bit, the internet lost access to a very long and notable list of applications for most of the day. We're talking about Snapchat, Roblox, Amazon Retail, so the Amazon.com site, OpenAI, ESPN, Apple Music, WhatsApp, Slack, Zoom, Fortnite, Xbox, Ring, Alexa, Canva, Venmo, Coinbase, major airlines, banking apps, news websites. I noticed this when the work tracking app Asana, which we use at work, like at my job, basically wouldn't load because it was having a seizure because it could not connect to its brain, which is in the cloud at US East 1 in Northern Virginia as part of AWS. Like, it literally couldn't connect to its brain where all the information is, right?
Yeah.
So we were looking at each other and being like, what were we working on again? Because we run the entire business in terms of what software we're developing on
Yeah.
this service, right?
I'm just gonna just because a friend once made the joke to me that if you really wanted to hit Americans where it hurts, it would be to take out the US coffee supply because depriving
Uh-huh.
Americans of caffeine would be disastrous. And I'm told the Starbucks app was one thing that went down. So
A lot of unhappy campers on Monday. I was one of them. I homebrewed on that day, but yeah, I enjoy a Starbucks latte every now and again. And that would have upset me because I have a lot of Starbucks points on there.
I also have to say, just apparently, it is a very common joke among network engineers that the problem is always DNS. And in this case, it
Yes,
was, in fact, a DNS problem.
it was a DNS. What is DNS? DNS stands for domain name server, right? And all this is, it's a very simple idea that happens to be critically important. So the internet consists of servers and routers, right? Servers is where the information lives, and routers is what connects the servers together, basically. So when you're on your web browser trying to connect to a website, you put in For instance, news.google.com, right? On the back end, a domain name server actually translate that into an IP address, which is a bunch of numbers separated by periods. So a classic one is 192.168.0.1, which is often what your home network is configured to, or something close to that, right? There are many of these domain addresses, and they get more complicated than that. Point is, there are a bunch of numbers that are machine readable, but not particularly human readable, right? You
And
don't want to be
the
typing in
reason
that
for that
IP.
is, yeah, like a good way to think of DNS is as a phone book. Like us
Correct.
humans could not possibly keep in our minds every IP address of every website. So you kind of need DNS as a critical service to be able to resolve IP addresses, or excuse me, resolve website names to IP addresses.
Yeah, it answers the question, what server am I going to get this information? And so all of these applications, so Asana and Roblox and all the rest of them, right? And in Amazon.com itself have in their code not IP addresses, but domain names to connect to these services via what's called an API, or an application programming interface. And this is how cloud-based applications work on the internet. API is really just a door. It's like a passageway that connects to a door, and allows you access to certain resources behind that door. So it's this way of connecting things in the cloud, but the passageways got mixed up as a result of this. The doors didn't open anywhere. So all the applications went down.
And what is our understanding of what caused this issue in the first place?
Yeah. So, like, given the point of this, the nominal point of this episode, you would have think it was a cyber attack. It actually wasn't. It was an error from within AWS, because these services, these foundational layer services like AWS, have gotten so complex that many of these, I guess you'd call them autonomic functions, right? Similar to digestion or the spinal cord, or continuing to breathe when you're knocked out, right? There's a whole layer of things in the human body that kind of keep happening without your brain being aware of it necessarily. There's sort of equivalent processes to that for a service like AWS, layers within layers within layers. And something got messed up in those layers of automation. We don't know what, but there was some interaction that resulted in a bad DNS update getting propagated and basically choking off access for all of these services. And there were no human beings involved.
Yeah. And
This
just
was,
as
yeah,
a core concept, I should just say I had to study up on this somewhat, but I make no claims as to be highly technical in this area, just enough to be able to speak to the policy issues. But one core concept among cybersecurity folks, or InfoSec folks, if you prefer, is the CIA triad. That is not the Central Intelligence Agency, but confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
mm-hmm,
Confidentiality, secret information is supposed to remain secret. Integrity, you want to be sure that the information has not been altered in some way. Availability is equally important. So if you cannot actually access the data in question, that is a security failure. And this was a failure when it came to the A plank in the CIA triad.
absolutely. Yeah, the gold standard, some would call it a low bar, actually, or a minimum bar in sort of cloud-based applications, is to have 5 sigmas of uptime, which means 99.99999, was that 5 nines? Percent uptime. And this put a big dent in everybody's uptime.
It was down for what, 12 hours?
Yeah, so they actually located and rectified the bad DNS update very quickly. But the thing is, it took a while for all of these client applications to recover. They had to process giant backlogs of information that had built up over the course of the day. And a lot of applications were down for 8 to 12 hours, is my understanding.
It had to be fixed manually, which is,
Yeah. Yeah.
can be a
So this
little
was
tricky.
not a cyber attack, but I think it illustrates points of weakness, shall we say, in the modern construction of the internet, as you may or may not know, was designed to be decentralized and very resistant to destruction or disruption. That was the whole point. Is this, sprawling network where, frankly, if there was a general nuclear war, you could eliminate some nodes, but the network would persist because there would still be other connections between terminals, right? And in the 70s, which I think more or less when most of this was launched, this was primarily for
Can't
email.
remember if the ARPANET comes on. I think it comes on in 1969.
Okay, a little bit earlier.
Yeah, and I'm
Yeah.
going to get the exact, but there's like 5 universities. A bunch of them are the UCs. I think University of Utah is in there, but
Yep.
that's kind of the origins. Yeah, sorry.
Dartmouth was
Continue.
was one of the nodes,
Yep.
which I learned freshman year. Anyway, the point is like it was supposed to be like a cockroach, right? But as part of this, like you can't send that much data, and you can't do real-time applications. So you trade sort of resilience for simplicity. Simple systems are often more resilient. Well, now fast forward to 2025, we have the exact opposite of that. We have incredibly complex systems that can do amazing things at lightning speed, right? This is the same general infrastructure that powers, for instance, ChatGPT and Claude, and gets you your toothpaste shipped up to 10 p.m. same day, for instance. It's like all the things we've come to take for granted, but are in fact miraculous advances. Well, the trade for that is centralization and brittleness, right, Galen?
Yeah, the two things that I immediately thought about when I heard about this were one, the enormous influence of private companies on
Mm-hmm. Also true.
effectively critical infrastructure. You know, essentially almost everything the US economy does now relies on wired networks, and private companies, for the most part, are in charge of those things, such as Amazon. To make the point a bit of a different way, something like 60 to 70%, so roughly 2/3 of the global cloud market, is dominated by 3 American companies: Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Compute, or I'm going to get the
Yeah.
Cloud Engine.
Cloud, Cloud's big query is
Yeah.
also what it's called.
So that's, essentially an oligopoly. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing, I think we mentioned these guys when we had our friend Ryan Weldzius on months ago to talk about tariffs, is the work by Henry Farrell and I can't remember his first name, Farrell and Newman. Their work on weaponized interdependence, which essentially, many people think of interdependence as being a good thing, right? Hey, if we're all kind of reliant on one another economically, the chances of war are going to go down because that's going to hurt everyone. They basically make the point that's not how networks ultimately end up in many cases. Rather than having this resilient distributed network, as you just said, we end up having hubs and spokes,
Mm-hmm.
which means there are these critical choke points. So I've seen this number disputed, but they claim in a very widely cited article from 2019, which I understand the Trump people latched onto, that something like 70% of world internet traffic flows through AWS in Loudoun County, Virginia. The lower number I saw was around a quarter of all global internet traffic. Even if it's that low number, that is a very large number.
Yes. Somewhere
Um,
between 25 and 70%.
yes. Now, for their purposes, what they're talking about is, well, that allowed the US government to weaponize that interdependence and basically surveil enormous amounts of data post
Mm-hmm.
September 11th through a variety of means. But because the US really dominated this tech space and so much of the physical infrastructure, the plumbing of the internet ran through this one part of the United States. And to boot, most of the big giant tech companies were American companies. The US government was able to really take advantage of that for surveillance purposes. But what this shows to me is that can very much work in the reverse. This is a major vulnerability. As you said, there's no reason to think this was a cyber attack. AWS said it was some flaw in the automation software. But look what the effect was. And Luckily, they were able to restore service relatively quickly, but I think the overall economic effects here were still up in the billions of dollars.
For sure. Yeah.
So if you imagine, a bad actor deliberately messing with one of these companies or with the backbone infrastructure of the internet or another piece of critical infrastructure that is reliant on digital communication, you can very easily see why people are worried about this sort of thing from a national security and economic standpoint.
Yeah, they can do tremendous damage. And to be clear, like these infrastructure companies they've effectively become state-like in terms of their size, their level of revenue, and this like the security that they put in place. They're looking out for this stuff, right? But they're still concentrated. In the event of war, one can imagine US East 1 being targeted, right? And taking down AWS and causing a lot of problems for everybody in a way that's a lot less easy to recover from.
I want to give a shout out to this publication because it was not one that I was familiar with prior to this morning when I was doing some reading on this. I don't even know how to pronounce it. The Minot Daily News. It's a local paper in South or North Dakota, excuse me. Pretty good piece on like the number of US government agencies that are highly dependent on AWS, including ones in things like intelligence and defense. And so you don't have to really use your imagination very much to see why this might be a high value target for an adversary in the event of a crisis.
Yeah, that seems problematic. So this was not a cyber attack, but we're becoming more and more vulnerable to this type of thing. And we know for certain that our adversaries are trying to take advantage of these vulnerabilities, right, Galen? So there have been state-sponsored cyber attacks on the United States and its allies in recent history. There have also been like sub-state actors
Yeah.
that have been very active. You see this a lot in cybercrime and kind of the blend between the two. So state intelligence agencies working with cybercrime gangs and
or
outsourcing.
or the state look turning a blind eye toward private actors or relying on cyber proxies. So like
Right.
sort of blurring the line. Yeah.
Yeah, we see this a lot with the Russians and the Iranians, I think. The North Koreans, interestingly, maintain an elite brigade of cyber warriors and hackers who,
Lazarus.
yes, Lazarus, which is a cool name. And it's especially interesting because the vast majority of North Koreans do not have internet access. Right. So it's like, well, where do these guys go to get trained? Probably China would be my guess, but I don't know. But they're apparently pretty good and they punch above their weight,
They punch above their weight. There's a good book. I think it's called The Lazarus Heist.
which sounds awesome.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't want to take this too far, but maybe this is a good time to talk about the claim about these things being asymmetric weapons.
Yeah.
And there's a few different parts to that. One, per your point, like there's the famous, views from space of at night between South Korea and North Korea, and South Korea has all these lights and North Korea is totally dark.
Mhm.
Which, is not a good thing for North Korea, but what it does mean is it's not a very target rich environment when it comes to cyberspace.
They're already basically at the bronze age, right?
Yeah. So, like,
Mostly.
whereas the United States is a very wired country, and as we were just talking about, highly dependent on this technology and these communications. And so it's a very
Yeah.
target rich environment. And then the other piece being that, unlike other weapon systems, cyber weapons, there's much lower barriers to entry. Defense, according to some accounts, is quite difficult. And so
Hmm.
you could have, the argument is this is a weapon of the weak. Now, we can talk about that. I don't necessarily find that argument totally convincing. Most of what North Korea has done is stuff like Bitcoin scams.
Yeah.
There was a famous case, like I can't remember the year, like circa 2016, where I think they were able to steal upwards of $80 million from a bank in Bangladesh, but basically there was a spelling error that cost them much more than that if they had been a little more careful. And of course, famously, the attack on Sony in retaliation for
Oh
a
yeah.
subpar Seth Rogen movie. So I'm
Yes.
not terribly impressed by what they've been able to do, but we can talk about the asymmetric logic a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think when it comes to the A team for cyber warfare, there's kind of three countries, maybe two. Well, no, between two and four, depending on how you think about it. The Americans are probably number one with the bullet. The
Although
China,
China has really closed the
yep.
gap, and now there is some debate about whether China might actually, be overtaking the US.
Uh,
But I agree with you. For now, I think the US is still probably number one.
yeah, it's like the internet originated in the United States. We control the nerve centers, we control the infrastructure. These companies work closely with the government, and we have the best technical talent in the world. China is making a play for number one in this area, just as it is practically everywhere else, if it's not already number one. Russia also has a lot of technical talent, and they deploy these weapons constantly, increasingly in Europe. They've deployed it in Ukraine, they've deployed it in the Balkans, I believe. And no, sorry, the Baltics.
Against
And
Estonia, 2007, that's a famous one. Yeah.
right. What happened there?
That was the one, I think maybe we mentioned this on a previous episode. There was a statue in Tallinn, the
Right.
capital, a World War II era statue that was getting removed, and it upset a bunch of Russian nationalists. And so they DDoSed Estonia for like 3 weeks. And
Yeah.
DDoS, meaning a distributed denial of service attack, not destroying data, certainly not blowing anything up like industrial control systems, but preventing flooding sites with so much internet traffic that the sites collapse and therefore preventing access to those sites.
Yeah, we talked earlier about how APIs are effectively like tunnels to doors, and then you get stuff out of the door. You pass stuff back and forth. A DDoS goes to that door and just hammers on it with like 10,000 people. And so the door doesn't work anymore. That's all DDoS is.
Yeah, the big one to know about the Russians. I mean, there's multiple ones. I guess we could debate the 2016 election interference. I'm less impressed by that one than many people are. The big
Hmm.
one to my mind is the 2017 NotPetya attack, which was motivated largely by the same kind of logic that led Putin to intervene militarily in 2022. It was notably it was either the day of or the day before Ukraine's Constitution Day, which is like symbolically celebrating Ukrainian independence. So I think that tells you
Right.
everything you need to know about what the motive was. What they did was quite clever. They did what's called a supply chain attack or supply chain poisoning attack. What they basically breached the equivalent of Ukraine's TurboTax update server. I think it's called Linkos Group, and they had a software that was like ME-Doc. I think that's what it's called. And basically every enterprise system in the country had this software because it was used to file one's taxes. And they breached this company's update server. And this apparently was some sort of like basically a mom and pop shop, more or less, that was running this thing. So I don't know how difficult it was. So they pushed out this malicious update and they combined it with very aggressive spreading mechanisms that basically any Windows system would be vulnerable to. One of them was a tool that was released. It was actually an NSA tool that was stolen. We think probably by the Russians, but we don't know, called Eternal Blue, which gave them like superpowers to spread this malware. And then another one was I don't know where people come up with these names, but it's called Mimikatz, which was discovered by a French researcher, and according to Microsoft was a feature, not a bug, but basically allowed you to not have to re-enter your credentials
Right.
to enter your system. The problem was if it's a multi-user system, that can get you in a lot of trouble. So
Hmm.
they found a clever way to get this out to as many systems as possible. They then were able to supercharge the worm with these spreading mechanisms, and something like 10% of all the computers in Ukraine went down. It cost something like $20 billion globally. And anyone doing business with Ukraine was affected. So, like FedEx got hit, the global shipping giant Maersk got hit pretty hard. People describe, I'm getting all this, by the way, from a book called Sandworm by Andy Greenberg. Really fun read. So called because apparently the GRU, the Russian military intelligence, the group responsible reportedly for doing this attack, was super into Dune.
I was going to say the spice must flow.
So,
The
so
Russians, yeah, they found a way to make paying taxes even worse.
yeah, that's right.
So that's the Russians. The Israelis, we'd be remiss to not talk about the Israelis. The Israelis are especially known for defenses in this area. There are a ton of cybersecurity startups in out of Tel Aviv. But a lot of the talent that founded those companies came out of the IDF and the IDF cyber brigades, right, Galen?
Unit 8200, sort
That's
of
right.
Israel's NSA. Yes.
Signals intelligence.
And Israel certainly punches above its weight. Quite impressive what it can do in cyberspace.
Yep.
And was obviously part of the Stuxnet attack on Iran's nuclear program, along with the United States. So Stuxnet and NotPetya are, for my money, the two most important ones
So
uh,
far.
when it comes to targeting critical infrastructure. The other piece of this is like Josh Rovner wrote a piece in, I think it was in War on the Rocks back in 2019, where his argument is basically, look, cyber is an intelligence game. That's mainly what we're talking about. And thus far, I think that's very hard to argue with. I think
Hmm.
that's mainly what cyber is used for, is stealing information and spying. And that's something China has thrived at. Now, one piece of that is you might be operationally excellent. I think the NSA tends to be phenomenal in this area. But the other piece is sometimes, even if you have good defense technologies, people mess up epically. So, like, we now think the Equifax hack was China. I'll spare you the details, but if you want to talk piss poor cybersecurity, go read about the Equifax hack. The Office of Management, no, excuse me, the Office of Personnel Management in 2014. That sounds kind of boring. It turns out it's basically the US government's HR. Why does that matter? Well, they keep everyone's background checks and fingerprints and stuff like that, including all of our spies. You might as well have just
Mm.
invited China into the physical building and given them the documents based on how poorly that place was protected. So, lots of secrets to be gained in cyberspace.
All right. So that's like kind of one pull or one usage for this technique or suite of technologies. But I've read a lot and we've been warned many times over the last several decades that it is also possible to turn cyber warfare into a weapon of mass destruction. And what does that mean exactly? It could mean 2,000 planes go down on the same day due to some kind of worm propagated into the software for navigation. It could mean power plants failing in spectacular ways. It could mean traffic lights in a city getting sequenced such that a bunch of accidents all happen at the same time, right? Like these are all real possibilities. And to exploit them, I mean, in many cases, these are kind of older systems, right?
Yes.
But we know that our adversaries have tried to penetrate them. And in some cases, we think they've succeeded. They
Or
have,
I think we know,
yeah, like we're,
or at least we assume.
yeah, we assume it's hard to tell, frankly. That's part of what makes this so crazy. We have not experienced any of these sort of like massive cyber attacks that have resulted in like casualties, let alone
Yeah.
mass casualties. We have reason to think that the United States has penetrated Russian, Chinese, and North Korean systems the same way. And if that's the case, then perhaps a balance of terror exists. But the fact is, a lot of this stuff is top secret. So we won't necessarily know. There's some reporting and mostly a lot of warnings, in my experience. But
I
just
mean, we
because,
learned a lot from the Snowden leaks, but yeah, this stuff is like horribly classified.
yeah.
NSA stands for no such agency or never say anything. So it makes it tough to study. You're right that there are plenty of people who are very worried about this. Interestingly, I think there tends to be which is not unique necessarily, but I think the degree to which it's bifurcated this strongly is interesting, with people in the policy world seemingly very worried about this and people in academic circles much less so,
Mm,
in my experience. But people warning about a cyber Pearl Harbor, Nicole Perlroth, who used to report on this for the New York Times, titled her book, "This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends." David Sanger's book, The Perfect Weapons, seems to recall Bernard Brody's The Absolute Weapon, referring
Mm-hmm.
to nuclear weapons. I think John Kerry, when he was being confirmed as Secretary of State, referred to cyber as the nuclear weapons of the 21st century. So there are people that worry about that. There's a few different ways of thinking about it. One is that maybe we just haven't had a political crisis where the stakes are high enough.
Yep. Yep.
So Bob Jervis, who I think we both believe is one of the smartest people ever to work in the field of political science,
Yep.
co-authored an article with Jason Healy that basically was like, look, when we're in kind of peacetime or there's not much of a crisis, cyber actually might be like a useful pressure release. We can't fight things out, so like let's just steal all of each other's shit. But if you get into a crisis, if you believe these things are tend to favor the offense and there's a premium on speed, like they're exactly the sorts of weapon systems you would not want to be lingering in the background if things start to heat up.
Yeah. So let's imagine a theoretical near future conflict between China and the United States over Taiwan. I would imagine that would start out in the conventional military realm. But if things start to go not so great for one side or the other, and we've deployed these cyber WMDs that are just sitting there waiting to get activated, and let's say we take the power supplies for the top 50 cities in China offline in a way that's not easy to recover from. Like, I don't know if we have the capabilities to do that. That's just one extreme scenario, but that's the kind of scenario we're talking about
Yeah,
when,
and like there's a book called 2034. I had to relook up one of the co-authored, Elliot Ackerman and James Stavridis, the latter of whom used to be the Supreme Allied Commander of
Mhm.
NATO. And they're basically envisioning what a future US-China war would look like. And this is one of the first things that happens if you read the book is China launches a major cyber attack on the United States.
yeah, and just like mass chaos, hospitals like, getting shut down, people dying, um, and it collapsed, right? Total collapse of
Yeah.
civilization.
Can I lay out like aside from this stuff being so classified, this is I think there's a lot of I think the differences between cyber and nuclear outweigh the similarities for the most
Yeah.
part. But one similarity, at least when it comes to studying it, is that we basically have very small ends,
Yep.
at
Yep.
least when it comes to the big stuff. My skepticism on these sorts of scenarios, which I should say, plenty of people, as I was saying, disagree. Like the first big book on this, Richard Clarke's Cyber War, like he lays out exactly the kind of scenario you were just talking about, like chemical facilities exploding, air traffic control going down, like
Right.
communication systems going haywire. So like there are people that think this is possible. I guess I would say if you look at these big attacks, all right. So we talked about NotPetya. That, for my money, is probably the most damaging cyber attack to date. And I always ask in class how many of you had heard of this before today, and almost invariably the answer is no one.
Yeah.
It seemed to me reading on it that the effects were more akin to like a terrorist attack, which is a big deal and
Hmm.
potentially a very big deal. But it's like disorienting, a psychological effect. Day to day life is disrupted, but it doesn't like rend the fabric of society. And the fact is, Putin was not able to achieve his political objectives in cyberspace. He ultimately had to resort to traditional military methods. And I got this wrong about the Russia Ukraine war. I was expecting that to be where we would see cyber, like potent cyber weapons first make a show, and we just haven't seen it.
Well, there's lots of reasons why the dog didn't bark. It could be that Ukrainians are also good at this. And
I
they've
think Ukraine got much better at it post NotPetya, and they had a lot of help.
yeah, so they could be defending or they could have plenty of vulnerabilities exploited in Russia. And again, balance of terror.
Well,
And
but so if that's the case, it implies defense is possible
mhm,
and deterrence and perhaps even cyber extended deterrence is possible.
that's right. Yeah, and to your point that nuclear war and cyber war are very much not the same things. Cyber war has this aspect of having infinite shades of gray, while nuclear war is very black and white, right? So you can modulate cyber war all the way from like stealing Bitcoin to taking down national infrastructure, right? And you can do it all the way from a 15-year-old in like a Romanian bedroom somewhere, right? To the NSA. It's the most secret and most powerful national security agency of the most powerful country in history. And nuclear weapons, it's like one or zero. A nuke exploded or it didn't explode. Now there's nuclear blackmail and nuclear tests and the like launch on warning and postures and all these other things. We've seen some of that.
Different yields. But yeah, you're right. Like nuclear weapons are good for basically one thing, like
Yep.
blowing stuff up. Cyber weapons are much more versatile.
Right. And yeah, it's like you can go up and down that ladder and that scale basically at will. Right. So my sense is every single day for practically every country, there are attacks by organized criminals or individual criminals or even state sponsored criminals or state organizations that are probing, that are stealing stuff, that are messing around, causing low level issues, right? I think that's just like a constant level of background activity.
Yeah.
And, like some of that stuff you're able to defend against. And there's a huge business around establishing defensive layers to make that stuff harder and prevent it. Right. And I think there's an arms race between offense and defense there.
As always.
Yeah. And then you step up the escalation ladder to more and more disruptive and problematic techniques and attacks. And NotPetya, is probably the biggest that we've seen. This internet outage on Monday was not an attack, but it was one of the biggest and nastiest outages in the history of the internet.
Yeah.
And the damages are still being tallied, right? And we
And
go all the way up to internet, like national infrastructure and mass
which we've
casualty.
seen that too. Like aside from NotPetya, like the Colonial Pipeline attack, the Stuxnet attack, like
Yeah.
I guess the question I have, those two cases raise a whole bunch of other questions, but the main question this always raises for me is short of having some like doomsday cyber weapon, which I don't think is possible, right? So like when I've talked to people that work in this area, imagining some sort of attack that like simultaneously takes down everything is not a thing. That would be like
No.
similar to a virus that infects every organism on the planet. Like
Right.
these are different operating systems, like using different. So like I guess you could launch a ton of different tailored weapons at a bunch of different systems simultaneously, but that strikes me as a bit far fetched. If that's not the case, then it's not clear to me why being able to target critical infrastructure in cyberspace gives you any more advantage than targeting it with traditional kinetic means, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and there's this concept cross domain deterrence. Okay. So if the United States gets hit by a cyber attack, it reserves the right to respond with force in other domains.
Mm-hmm.
So
Is that doctrine?
it is. And actually, I can't remember if it's been reversed, but during Trump's first term, I think it was in 2018, the US did reserve the right, depending on the nature of the cyber attack, to retaliate with nuclear weapons.
I remember that. Yeah,
Yeah.
now that you bring it up. And I think that's pretty notable, right? That means that at least, for that administration, they believed that a mass casualty attack was possible. Yeah.
Oh, I have no doubt that it's possible.
Yeah.
My question is like, is it that big of a game changer if you can still retaliate the old fashioned way?
Yeah. My thinking there is the ability to attribute the attack accurately, and then the costs of conducting such an attack probably potentially being lower, although I don't know, right? Because you probably need to expend a lot of resources to penetrate those systems, but it's a different type of resource,
No,
right?
I agree with you. This is a point
Yeah,
people make about Stuxnet. If you look at all the resources that went into it and all the people and all the expertise, still probably cost less than one B-1 bomber.
totally. Yeah. And yeah, and it's not like you're necessarily they could be multiple use resources, right? Yeah, so those are two major factors where you could get some affordance or some advantage out
Yeah.
of going cyber. And then the lack of warning could be another step, right? Because it's like if you're conducting kinetic strikes, there's usually some indication and you have some amount of warning. Even with ICBMs, it's
Yeah.
like we have early warning systems that try to give us, 45 minutes to figure out how to
Yeah.
respond, right? Cyber, it could be instantaneous.
Yeah, I mean, this is one where maybe there is a decent analogy to nuclear, although it's something I still think about. Like, as you said, there potentially is like a mutually assured destruction piece of this going on. Like, the US government assumes that much of its critical infrastructure is laced with Russian and Chinese malware.
Yeah.
And I would imagine most Chinese and Russian officials believe that their critical infrastructure is laced with American malware.
Yep. If they can do it, you kind of have to assume, right?
Yeah.
What's interesting
It's
is there's been no demonstration of it.
no, and that to me is why the Russia Ukraine case right now is really important. Now, like as you said, there are factors that explain why this dog didn't bark.
Mm-hmm.
But for my money, if you were ever going to expect it, right? Like you seem to have a situation where a very sophisticated cyber actor has the motive to do it.
And it's not winning conventionally.
Right.
Yeah.
We give it even right. So like the first few months, I sort of was like, maybe Putin's holding this in his back pocket. He absolutely would have used it by now. Now maybe deterrence is operating. Maybe it's actually really hard to do this. And
Yeah.
like maybe it's really hard to pair cyber with kinetic, right? This was like the vaunted Gerasimov doctrine was pairing these sorts of things. And it hasn't happened. And like it hasn't been for lack of trying. Like we
Yeah.
know that Russia has tried. And that makes me wonder about,
Feasibility.
yeah,
Yeah. Because it's a strong test. You're right. It's like this is where we would expect to see, like Kyiv being taken offline
yeah.
in a way that would kill like thousands of people.
The other thing to me that I'm not so like what we're talking about now, which we probably should have foregrounded a while ago, is
Better late than never.
we've talked about the theory of the nuclear revolution. There's also the theory of the cyber revolution, which is
Okay.
taken directly
Yeah.
from, right? So we mentioned Bob Jervis. He wrote the book, The Meaning of the Cyber Revolution. A guy named Lucas Kello wrote an influential article about 10 years ago called The Meaning of the Cyber Revolution. So like
Mm.
this is now a well-developed body of theory. And one claim that people in that camp make is like we are seeing I don't know if you want to call it like a weakening of state sovereignty or at least an empowering of non-state actors.
Hmm.
I am much more skeptical of that. I think if you want to do some of this big stuff, you do have to be a state. And I think most states do have the capability to track down non-state actors operating within their borders if they want to. Like, just to use the Stuxnet case, since we've never really talked about what happened. This was where the United States and Israel sabotaged Iran's uranium enrichment plant at Natanz, even though it was air gapped, i.e., not connected to the internet. We still don't totally know how it was done, but we think it was probably either a mole or some US or Israeli asset. Could have been plugged in with a USB stick.
Hmm.
And
Probably was.
you talk to people, there's no truly air gapped network, right? Like if for no other reason that sometimes you have to update it, which means you have to put in like pluggable media, which could have
Hmm.
malware on, right? We don't know, but it used a variety of clever spreading mechanisms. What it effectively did was it spun the centrifuges that enrich the uranium
Too fast.
too fast or too slow. So too
And
fast, it'll explode. Too slow, you imagine a top spinning and eventually will fall off of its axis. And it was timed for maximum effect. So, like, these are centrifuge cascades. So, there's a time when it goes into the next centrifuge. It was timed to take effect when it would be maximally effective.
yeah.
There's also this clever, like, Ocean's 11 aspect of it where the malware would record what normal activity looked like and then play that back to the engineers So even as these things were spinning off, everything would look normal. Like really impressive.
Then like to me, it's just like that's Mossad all day, right? Like,
Well, my understanding is like the NSA does a lot of the coding work too. I
sure.
think it's probably Israeli intelligence that's able to get it into the facility, but
Yeah.
neither I nor I believe anyone else. Supposedly, there's a theory that it was a Dutch mole. We don't know. Point being, to pull this off, like if you read about what was required, people refer to it as like a mini Manhattan project. Like there were
Right.
literally replica facilities of this place set up. The worm, the program was like 20 times larger than a normal one. It had basically no bugs in it. The more aggressive version of it had legitimate certificates
Mm.
embedded. People were like, how did they actually able to pull this off without digitally signed certificates? They stole legitimate digital certificates from two different trailer parks in Taiwan. Like that is
That's
something
amazing.
that is only within the realm of states. So like if we're
Yeah.
talking about that stuff, like cybercrime, sure.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about this big stuff, I really do think like actually this tilts the playing field even further in favor of state actors.
I would say so. So one question for you then is the question we're all asking about practically every field of human endeavor, including screwing each other over, is how does AI affect this?
Oh man.
Yeah, because you can
Um,
be like, well, AI is getting increasingly good at coding, and it's getting increasingly good at acting autonomously. So that
look,
opens a
so
number of doors, right?
in some ways, I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but you're asking the wrong guy because
I'm all, I'm also the wrong guy. I don't
okay,
know who the
well,
right guy is.
I am almost positive you have interacted with AI more directly than I have. I don't see
Maybe.
much use for it so far in my personal life. And like many of the claims I've seen about it, maybe I'm wrong about this, strike me as still theoretical,
Hmm.
like the effect it will have on warfare and autonomous drone systems and stuff like that. Here's what I'll say, like I have heard people say it will tilt the playing field more heavily in favor of the defense. I've heard
That's
some people
interesting.
say that. Now, for example, you just said maybe it writes really great code. One, this is kind of a high level one, right? I mentioned the Colonial Pipeline attack. My understanding on that was that there was an ex employee's account that was never deactivated and did not have two-factor authentication enabled on it. And so, like, another big one we were talking about, the SolarWinds attack, which was one
Hmm.
of the most devastating intelligence breaches, where the Russians got access to like 18,000 different companies and some pretty important US agencies by poisoning the update server at this company, SolarWinds, which had such good cybersecurity practices that at one point you could have gotten into its update server with the password SolarWinds123.
Classic.
Okay. Now, there's that level of being able to get into systems, and then there's high level stuff like 0 day vulnerabilities.
Right.
Zero-day vulnerability is basically something by definition that you cannot play defense against because it is a bug that doesn't necessarily, it's not like a typo. If it was a typo, the code just wouldn't run, but it enables some functionality that is unintended and
Yes. And
potentially the
importantly, yeah, nobody has ever seen it before,
correct.
including the people that put out the software or the hardware. So
It is
they don't know
called
to look for it.
It's called a 0 day vulnerability because since no one knows about it, there has been exactly 0 days where you could plan to patch the bug.
Exactly.
Well, if AI can vet software much more effectively and write cleaner code that doesn't have vulnerabilities like that, this was a major, there's CISA, one of the most poorly named US agencies. I think it is the cybersecurity, the cybersecurity infrastructure.
Agency?
There's like infrastructure in there twice for or secure no cyber security and infrastructure security agency. It's like something like that.
Gross.
They published a big document in 2023 that like this was their main recommendation was basically like because private companies are so heavily involved in cybersecurity when it comes to national security issues, like we need to make this a priority and regulate it in the same way that we make automakers have seatbelts or airbags. We should
Hmm.
regulate software that consumers are using.
Hmm.
Well, if AI can do that and it can write code that cannot be exploited that way, that would tilt things more toward the defense. Or you take something like endpoint detection and response, which is, kind of the one of the better ways that enterprise ensures their cybersecurity now, by basically like looking for heuristics of unusual activity. Why this thing that's doing what it's doing, writing it in base 64? That doesn't make a lot of sense. That probably is like something malicious, right?
Yeah.
Maybe AI can supercharge that sort of thing. I'm like not willing to make this bet yet, because just I study international politics, and every time the defense does something, the offense does something, and I'm sure
Hmm.
there are plenty of powerful offensive malicious cases for AI as well.
Yeah. Yeah, the jury's out, right? But hopefully the jury doesn't come back in with some kind of like mass casualty attack.
Yeah.
That's a
Well,
risk,
what do you
right?
think about this? Because I honestly just don't have a strong opinion on it.
Yeah, the thing that concerns me about it is that AI is inhuman in the sense that it can never stop working. You can design AI to just be like, I need you to find a way into this system. And if need be, clone yourself 1,000 times and try every strategy you can think of. So that's a possibility. It's just like a force multiplier for brute force attacks and like finding vulnerabilities, right? I also think that AI could be used in social engineering attacks. So this is where basically you go to employees of these important vulnerable companies like Amazon, for instance, and pretend to be their boss or their relative who's been kidnapped or something like that. AI can do that increasingly convincingly. It can, generate
Yeah.
deep faked video of your boss. So that's another area of vulnerability.
That's
And like
that's a great point, especially because like, we tend to think of cyber as like, oh my God, 0 day vulnerability stuck. The vast majority of attacks still
social
use,
engineering,
yeah. And like,
scams.
if you want to go check out like amazing video, like DEF CON social engineering, that part of the big hacker conference, I think it's in Vegas every year. Like they have videos of that on YouTube that are amazing to watch. Like people just give away their secrets.
All the time. All the time. It's Nigerian prince all over again, just more sophisticated versions of that, right? And I feel like AI, until we get defenses where you have a personal AI that's like a bullshit detector, right? Which I think is going to be $1 trillion product for whoever like figures that out.
Yeah.
You can invest in my new company, by the way. So just hit me up on YouTube if you want to invest. But this is going to be a problem. And then finally, it's this idea that AI is starting to have inhuman creativity in the sense that like it comes at problems in very nonlinear ways
Hmm.
sometimes that like a human being would have never considered. And there's a bunch of different examples. The example that I think of is actually in chess,
Interesting.
where the most powerful chess engines now are not analytical engines. So they don't understand the rules of chess. They've been trained to look at the board as an entirety and see the patterns on the board and just understand the sequence of patterns that get you to a win
Hmm.
and like the
Yeah.
billions of permutations, right? So they're not playing chess, they're playing art.
So that's interesting. A big
Yeah,
problem I have thinking about this is like, if you're asking me right now, am I super impressed by it? My answer is like emphatically no.
sure.
Like right now, what I basically see it able to do is answer questions more elegantly and like a slightly more convenient way than Google search used to be able to. And if you want to cheat in college, it can write subpar college papers. Like
Yeah.
I'm the first to admit that like it's difficult for me. Like I can suspect sometimes if something is AI written, but I have no way of proving that. My main mechanism against it is like you're just going to get a shitty grade if you do that, because I just don't think it's very good.
Right.
But I by no means dismiss the claim that it's going to be revolutionary. Like that could be the case. And I don't know if you listened to it, but Jon Stewart's podcast, he had Jeffrey Hinton on, the Oppenheimer of AI, the
Yeah.
godfather of AI. And like, he seems like a very smart guy. In fact, he must be to be that influential in this area. And he was doing it for like 50 years. And he ultimately stopped working, I think it was at Google, because he is very worried
Yes.
about where this is going. And some of the things he was saying about how powerful it's going to be were unsettling. But
A
this
little
makes it very
color.
difficult for me to evaluate it because this hasn't happened yet. Like what I see now, presumably, is quite different from these revolutionary implications.
He's talking about super intelligence, which does not exist yet. But when we're talking about Hinton, we're talking about the guy who picked up the idea of neural networks from
Yes.
John von Neumann, who
By some accounts, the smartest person in the
who
history of
ever
the
lived.
world. Yes.
Yes. It's like von Neumann and Einstein and Dirac and like
Yeah.
maybe Newton
Yeah.
or Leibniz. It's like, but probably von Neumann.
That's I've heard von Neumann more than any other is like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like speaking of like inhuman intelligence, he was
Yeah.
very human, but like, yeah, there's levels, and he was many levels above most people. And Hinton took that idea and he ran with it. So he's many levels. And yeah, it's not just him. There's guys like Hassabis, right? It's DeepMind guy. There's all the people at Claude, which is the Anthropic, the most ethical AI company. And they are extremely concerned because what we are doing is we are building giant artificial brains using the same basic ideas that power our brains, except, powered by gigawatts
Yeah.
of
And like
energy.
I think it was like, by the way, like you want to talk about a company that missed the boat, like IBM Watson, that was like 50
Oh,
years ago, right? Like they seem to be in the lead on it. But like,
well, yes, but like that was not a neural network
no,
architecture.
I know,
Yeah.
but like your point on chess, right? That thing was already beating grandmasters.
Mm,
So like I don't dismiss that it could have all sorts of like massive implications, both for what we're concerned with and any other aspect of human interactions. But like, it's very difficult for me to theorize
yeah.
from the standpoint of October 2025 what that's going to look like. Like my experience with it thus far is like,
Underwhelming.
yeah, exactly. Like I'm sure it will be a much bigger deal than that. And I like you, if part of my job is to read the military applications of this stuff. Autonomous systems on their own, which we already have, but they're going to be much better
Yeah.
and be able to like make decisions autonomous, right? Like
That's
this
happening right now.
this is very important stuff, which could have really major implications for military balance, for thinking about the ethics of warfare, so on and so forth. But until some of these bigger breakthroughs come through, like me trying to sit here and say whether this is going to favor the offense or defense in cyberspace,
I
like
have no idea.
I just like don't value my own opinion.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, I think we can be humble and correct and be like, we have no idea. Like we don't know. Part of what you learn in graduate school is that you don't know anything, right, Galen?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we definitely don't know anything about this yet.
Totally. Like two of the best lessons I've ever heard were in grad school, which is I don't know is an acceptable answer.
Yeah, it's the
If you
best
got
answer.
something wrong, admit it. And I was like, those two lessons are worth their weight in gold.
And yeah, not just in academia, but also in business or in life. It's like most people don't know and they make mistakes. So
Yeah.
it's okay.
Yeah. I know we've been on this for a bit and like we probably should wrap up, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't at least mention the quantum computing piece of
Oh
this.
my God. Yeah, I thought about that and then forgot about it. I'm glad you did mention it. So,
Look,
yeah, combine neural networks with quantum computing, and you could conceivably have something orders of magnitude more powerful than the human brain, like
look, like
many orders of magnitude.
my experience, this is going to be an inside joke that like six people in the world will get, but is like My experience with trying to learn about how quantum computing works is my experience with like the one time I played badminton, which is like it went very badly. Like
Don't have the reflexes for it, man.
like my understanding is basically like there's this thing called superposition,
Yes.
which mean, computers work on bits, right? Like they can be a one or a zero,
Yeah.
and you have a ton of different circuits on a chip. And so you could have any number of combinations, and that's how we get computing power. And superposition means that you can be in a state of one and zero simultaneously. And I do not understand that at all, but that's the limits of my understanding. The key thing to know is like if and when there are quantum computing breakthroughs, and Google just reported one the other day, there's going to be a major threat to encryption. And we have
Yes.
been talking about the offense defense balance in cyberspace. One area where the defense is believed to have a major advantage is encryption, that our
Yes.
encryption algorithms are actually quite strong and it's very difficult to crack encryption. Quantum promises potentially on what's called Q Day to be able to break encryption until we come up with quantum resistant encryption.
Yeah. So for instance, the SHA 256 algorithm, right, which takes classical computers till the heat death of the universe
Yeah, correct.
to
Yeah.
crack, suddenly you crack that in a matter of minutes. So we're talking about like 10 to the 30th times faster, right? Quantum is very good at specific types of math. That's one of them, factoring. And another is matrix inversion, which is the basic operation underpinning neural networks, training them specifically.
So if you can put these two technologies together, assuming they actually come online or are as powerful as many people claim to be, and you can see why this is now, these are key arenas of great power competition, right? Like
Yes,
AI and quantum, this is where lots of money is getting spent in
by
national.
the Chinese and the Americans. And you can, yeah, if we can build our own gods, then we'll probably beat the Chinese and vice
Yeah.
versa.
And again, this is a world that's even just difficult for me to like picture, let alone theorize.
It's an inhuman world and we're human beings. And we're dipping our toes into this. And a lot of really smart people are like, maybe we should do that.
So
But
I guess I'll wrap with this. Like as things stand now, I am not a believer in the cyber revolution, and I very much like think the nuclear threat is
mm-hmm,
worth spending more time on potentially.
mm-hmm,
I tend to think people like Rovner have it right that this is more of an intelligence game, which is important.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Intelligence is really important.
Oh, yeah.
But when it comes to like war fighting and stuff like that, I'm sure there are important applications. I'm less sold on the cyber revolution. Depending on where those two technologies go, I would be the first to get rid of that state or disown that statement. But
What worries me when we have something new like this is it's not a problem until it is. And then that first time it's a problem can really suck, like really bad. And yeah, we don't know whether or not it's going to happen or when it's going to happen, but it could happen.
yeah.
So we got to pay attention to it here on Global Tantrum.
Can I just make one complaint about all of this? It's like,
Yes.
assuming this all happens, this is remarkable and like incredible feats of human intelligence, but we haven't found a way to regrow the cartilage in my knee. So I'm
Maybe
very annoyed
quantum
about all
computing
this.
will fix that too, like nanobots and stuff. That sucks, man. And
Man, it is what it is.
it is what it is. All right. Good game, Galen. That was a fun one.
You too, man.
Yeah, till next time, this has been Global Tantrum.